Hi everyone, and welcome to Wildlife Wednesday. My name is Tyler Greenlee, and I'm super happy to have you all join me this evening to check out some great wildlife footage that we've been getting in Grand Teton this last month. Right off the bat, we have wolves on the National Elk Refuge, and I will say that the footage we got this month of wolves has been absolutely incredible. It's been the best year of my life as far as watching wolves. And so I'm super excited to share this with you guys. We have a bunch of guides who contributed footage for this video, including Sarah, Roy, Drew, Bo, and I just wanted to shout you guys out and thank you. And so without further ado, here are Wolves of Grand Teton. This past winter has been one of the best years for wolves while out on tour, and we have gotten some incredible footage of wolves out on the National Elk Refuge and in Grand Teton National Park, including this incredible social pack behavior with the Lower Grovant wolf pack. The Lower Grovant wolf pack is the most prominent wolf pack we've been seeing this winter, and they've been on the refuge almost every day, which is incredible. They are a fairly large pack with at least 14 members. And we've been able to identify a couple individuals, such as the alpha female here, pinning what we believe is another female. We've also been seeing a white wolf that has either an injured femur or maybe an injured hip, moving with the Lower Grovant pack. We think it is one of the members. Here is a good portion of the pack, 11 members crossing an open plain. It has been just such a joy watching them. However, they are not the only wolves that we have been seeing this winter. We've also been seeing a pair of dispersal wolves, the female which we suspect came from the Lower Grovant pack. Here's the male sleeping in front of a herd of elk, which is super interesting to see how the elk are just not very aware of these wolves at times. We are not certain where these wolves came from. We have some suspicion that maybe the female came from the Lower Grovant pack. Some people believe that they have actually seen her with those wolves. This pair has also been seen very close to the Grovant pack, and so we do believe that there could be some family ties there, which is really interesting and it is something that commonly occurs in wolf packs, is where certain members might split off and for a while live closely to their natal pack while trying to form their own pathway, trying to form their own pack. Here is the female that we were talking about. This is the first time we've featured her, and she is absolutely beautiful, a very light colored wolf. These wolves will definitely have a challenging time, but if they are related to the Grovants, having a little bit of shelter from their natal pack will definitely help them. This isn't the first time that we've seen a pack split or members leave a pack. We've also seen quite a few Junction Butte members leave their pack also. And Rescue Creek is descended from Junction. Wherever these wolves came from, we are really hoping that they survive. Dispersing is a very dangerous time for wolves. Many don't survive just because there's a lot of competitors on the landscape, other wolf packs. There's a lot of people on the landscape. And so far they're doing great. And we have our fingers crossed that they make it and maybe start a new pack. What's been really exciting for us is we have seen this pair hunt quite a bit on the National Elk Refuge, including on this occasion filmed by our guide Roy, who watched the pair kind of single out this lone elk that was crossing the elk refuge all on its own. And this charge was led primarily by the female. One thing that's impressive to me is how much speed this elk puts on in order to escape the wolves. The wolves just simply cannot keep up in the deep snow. And it shows that wolves really do need to eat and capture weakened prey. They just can't outrun healthy elk. And so here is an example of the same wolves hunting an elk that is not doing so well. This elk is infected with scabies, which is a skin parasite. It's also incredibly thin. And so you can see from the last video that elk really outran those wolves very quickly. This elk did not outrun these wolves, and they actually caught it and took it down very quick. In this clip, you can see that scabies and how thin the elk's neck is, and down she goes. And that video was filmed by our guy Drew. Here's another video by Roy of those wolves hunting again. And so wolves are incredibly selective oftentimes when they're hunting. That male stumbled there. I don't know if you guys caught that in the video. And so in this footage, you can see the wolves are actually pushing quite a few elk, and mainly mature cow elk, which all bunch together. Elk have this really cool adaptation where they hide in the herd in order to avoid being selected by wolves. However, if an elk cannot keep up with the herd, like this younger elk here, the wolves oftentimes will select and take down those individuals. And this can be pretty tough to watch, but this is a part of nature, and wolves have to feed. This is the good time of year for wolves. They're eating a lot, and they're building up their fat reserves because when summer comes, oftentimes wolves can't find enough prey to sustain themselves. Summer is the hardest time for wolves, while winter is the good season. And so it's been an absolutely incredible winter watching wolves in Grand Teton National Park. And so this is, of course, the time where I remind you that we do give wolf-specific tours. We give wolf-specific tours in Grand Teton, which have moderate success, but we do give really successful wolf watching tours in Yellowstone National Park, including tours that last over several days, which is really exciting. And so if you are wanting to see wolves in the wild, going with a tour guide into Yellowstone or Grand Teton is going to be your best chance. And so thank you all for tuning in and watching this great wolf footage with me.
Well, all of that wolf footage was insane. And so, I mean, once again, I have to thank the guides for submitting all that footage for us to use and then just show you guys. We've been having just an insane winter on the National Elk Refuge with the Lower Grovant pack and that pair of dispersal wolves hunting elk and just being super visible for us, which is pretty awesome. Before we get into our next video, I saw that some people might have had some connection issues. I just checked to make sure the videos were running smoothly and we should be good going forward. But if there are any other issues, just let me know and I'll try to fix them as we continue onward. All right, so up next, we have Kirk, who we haven't seen in a while. Kirk is one of our more senior guides. He works for us in the summer, but he's currently out of the country guiding elsewhere. But we're super happy that he was able to help us make this video. And so up next, we have Kirk, who's going to talk a little bit about tracking with us.
Hey everybody, it's Kirk here. I'm out on a little cross-country ski tour. Hasn't snowed in a few days, so I think that we'll have an opportunity to find a lot of tracks out here. The winter is one of my favorite times of the year because although it seems kind of quiet and dead and desolate and cold, it's really quite active. I think there's a lot of animals out here hustling to make ends meet and leaving these tracks behind for us to find. So follow along with me today and I'll be able to show you what I find out here. So we've got our first set of tracks here belong to a coyote. They're certainly a canine's track where you get a foot pad here and then 4 toes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can draw an X between these toes and the foot pad. That tells us that it belongs to a canine. And I don't think that they belong to a wolf because it's not a very big track. You know, maybe half the length of my finger, a couple inches. I've seen wolf tracks about the size of my hand. I'd expect a coyote to be making its way through the forest here, maybe looking for rodents, maybe like mice or voles, or maybe even squirrels. Something to feed that metabolism and help this coyote carry through the winter and generate heat. And there goes these tracks. Now, while this isn't a track in the snow, I think that it's a pretty interesting piece of sign. What we have here in this aspen tree are a set of bear claws, and I'll zoom in here so you can see that for yourself. Maybe a black bear was climbing this tree, looking for a safe place to rest in the fall, or maybe accessing some sort of food resource up there. But regardless, it's left behind this sign for us to know that it was here. And I just think it's so cool to find these tracks, a sign, and bring to light what was here when we couldn't see it. I think that it really brings a forest to life. Here's another track that belongs to a pretty small animal. A small weasel called an ermine that's jumping along, putting its whole body into each track here. And I'll show you that we can see where it's landed, and then it's jumping out and scraping this snow and putting its whole body into the next jump, and the next one, and the next one. And I can see their tracks all over this place because they need to stay really active in the winter. They're long and slender, so they lose a lot of heat, and that means that they're constantly hunting. Maybe listening, searching for mice under the snowpack, moving into their dens, feeding on them, digesting them, metabolizing and generating heat, and then moving along, looking for their next victim. If you're a person, I think, they're really cute. They're one of my favorite animals out here, the ermine. But if you're a mouse, they're kind of a monster. All right, we've got a big track here. Looks like somebody might have been walking through here without any snowshoes on, post-holing through the snow. But instead, I can tell you that this track belongs to a moose. These moose have long legs that'll penetrate through the snowpack, and flexible hip joints that allow them to pick those legs up and out of the snow, almost like a swimmer, picking their arms up and out of the water. And then this depression here is where a moose decided to take a rest, probably a digestion break, where it's gonna regurgitate some of the twigs and buds that it's been nibbling on and chew on them for a little while longer, just to break them down a bit further before sending them off to its other stomachs, where they'll be fermented and lipids and proteins will be extracted. So maybe this moose sat down here for an hour or two and then left behind the evidence of the digestion process and then continued onwards. What I think we found today is not only a lot of cool tracks, but when you are hiking around, skiing around with a more intentional eye, the forest is going to open itself up to you and tell you all of its secrets. And today we've seen tracks from ermine, moose, and coyotes, and so many more.
Well, pretty cool to hear from Kirk about some track and sign. It's been a great winter for seeing animal sign because we've been getting a lot of recent snowstorms. And so on our snowshoe and ski tours, we've been able to go out and actually see some fresh marten tracks. I know some of our guides recently got wolf tracks on tour, which is pretty awesome. And so the conditions have just been great for wildlife tracking. Up next, we have another winter species that we see here in Jackson, but they're becoming more visible, as the temperatures warm up. Birds are preparing for breeding, and so pygmy owls are starting to establish territories. And so up next, we have pygmy owls and some cool facts about them.
Despite the large amount of snow, March is oftentimes the beginning of spring here in the Tetons. And we can see the change largely because the birds begin to return. One of the birds we've been seeing recently is the northern pygmy owl, which is a very small raptor that spends the entire year here in Jackson Hole. And here are a couple great videos that Drew got on tour of this owl. Pygmy owls are special for a lot of different reasons. They are much more diurnal than other owls. They feed largely on songbirds, which is also unusual. And because they're diurnal, they're super vulnerable to attacks from owls and other raptors and other larger birds like ravens. And so to help fend this off, they have these really cool dark spots on the backs of their heads, which you might have actually been seeing in these videos. When the pygmy owl turns its head, you can see these two dark spots, and that's to help protect them from aerial attacks from larger birds. The change that I was talking about earlier that we're seeing is pygmy owls and other birds are beginning to set up territory and to advertise that territory. And so recently we were able to see a pygmy owl at the very top of a tree hooting, which is super exciting. It is absolutely adorable to see. And so here is that video and audio. Pygmy owls are one of the most special raptors that we have here in Grand Teton National Park. And so I'm so excited that we were able to capture some footage of this little bird on tour. And we'll keep an eye out in the future for them.
It's really awesome to see these little raptors on tour. Pygmy owls are definitely a specialty that we have out here in Wyoming, and they're always a surprise to see. It sounds like we're still having some connection issues. And so if you're unable to see the broadcast while we're live, you can always come back later and kind of review what's going on. I'm so sorry about those connection issues. It maybe is our recent snowstorm. Thank you all for sticking around and still viewing us despite those connection issues. Up next, we have our one of our best naturalists, Sarah Ernst, talking about coyotes and bighorn sheep.
Hello, this is guide Sarah Ernst, and I'm currently here in my driveway, which as you can see has a heck of a lot of snow. The long-legged moose can cope with such deep snow, but most of the other hoofed animals, they have to get the heck out of here in the wintertime. And they will be migrating down to areas that are a bit less snow, maybe because they're windswept, or south-facing slopes where the sun is melting the snow. One of the animals that's always a highlight of any of our winter wildlife watching trips for both the guides and our visitors are the bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep have been migrating from the high elevation lands around Jackson Hole to the low-lying buttes in the southern end of the valley for hundreds, if not many thousands of years. This is based on archaeological evidence from the Tukadika, or the mountain sheep-eater people. To this day, there are hunting blinds, sheep traps, and teepee rings found in many locations around the historic wintering grounds of the bighorn sheep. Sadly, due to disease and habitat loss, Jackson Hole's bighorn sheep herds have shrunk in population over the years, and this continues to be a threat to the herd today. But considering many other ski resort towns have lost their bighorn sheep altogether, we are really blessed to have a large herd of bighorn sheep right on the edge of town on the National Elk Refuge. Bighorn sheep usually arrive on the elk refuge during the first half of the breeding season, which peaks from November to December. Most of the fighting we see occurs pretty early on as the males establish their pecking order for the season, but we will still continue to see some conflicts through early January and even later on in the winter as the young males practice. It's always exciting to view the rut of any of our large animals, but there is something special about the bighorn sheep. Maybe because we know it's the last of the season. At just 6 months, bighorns have a shorter gestation period than our other hoofed animals. Or maybe it's the drama. There are long moments of quiet tension as the sheep engage in their highly ritualized preparations for contact, followed by the shockingly loud, violent moment of impact. The males are literal battering rams as they work out the pecking order. The most powerful and dominant males do most of the breeding while the young males try to sneak around behind the backs of the exhausted big males. Imagine the force generated as the rams smack their 30-pound heads at one another at 20 miles per hour. If we humans were to hit the ground head first from a motorcycle at such a speed, without a helmet, we'd be lucky to get away with just a concussion. Yet bighorn do this over and over again for weeks, and while we can't ask them if they suffer headaches from it, they rarely seem to show any ill effects. Bighorn sheep have built-in helmets on their skulls, thick, shock-absorbing skulls, and keratin horn sheaths that absorb some of the blow. Mechanisms that slow down blood flow through the chambers around their skull help cushion the brain, like bubble wrap cushions a delicate package. Still, bighorn have to hit each other at a precise angle to minimize the damage. You'd think that a male would want to injure or kill his opponent. After all, it would be one less potential suitor for the females to choose from. But a fight that could injure your opponent could also injure you, even if you were the victor. And an injured opponent could lure in predators that could then threaten you or your offspring. And that brings us to a cool moment that we had this week on one of my wildlife and snowshoe combo tours. We began at the National Elk Refuge, watching some distant cow elk before moving on to some bighorns that had descended to the bottom of the cliffs for breakfast. Some of my guests might wonder why I'm always scanning the hills for animals a mile away when we had this perfectly good herd of bighorn sheep just 30 yards away from our touring vehicle. And most of the time I have to admit that there's nothing out there at all, but it's always worth searching. And this day, oh boy, were we rewarded for our patience. With my Maven-built binoculars, I noticed a silhouette on the edge of the cliff that looked a little funky. There was a shape of a horn, but it was a weird angle on the ground, and above it there was a small face, topped by a pair of very large ears, too large for a sheep. I put a spotting scope on it to get a closer look, and turned out to be this pair of coyotes feeding on a young male bighorn wedged right into the cliff. What was unusual about this event was the timing and the age of the sheep. Like most ungulates, bighorn sheep are at their most hardy at the beginning of winter, when they still have plenty of body fat reserves. We tend to see more carcasses in the second half of winter, as the animals are progressively weakened by poor forage and winter conditions. And this was a young male, so he should have been in pretty good health. Coyotes aren't major predators of adult bighorn sheep, although they do sometimes take lambs in the spring, if they can catch them. The size of a bighorn, 100 to 300 pounds, is pretty tough for a pair of 30-pound coyotes to take down. Though he's closer in size to a female than a big mature ram, something would have still had to trip the odds for the coyotes to be able to catch the sheep. Plus, bighorns can elude most predators on the cliffs with their rubbery hooves. That's why we seldom see bighorns away from the nearby cliffs. Looking at the way this sheep was wedged into the cliff, we can only speculate what happened. Did he fall to his death from up above? Did he get stuck and then fall prey to the coyotes? Or suffer an injury that made him easier to catch? Or did he just happen to die there on his own from disease or maybe after being hit by a car? We just couldn't tell from our parking spot, but it sure was an interesting mystery. Regardless of whether they found or killed the sheep, a coyote never knows when its next meal is coming from. Coyotes get most of their winter diet here in the elk refuge from rodents and scavenging, both of which are unreliable food sources. So these coyotes wolfed down their meal as fast as they could. A coyote's stomach can easily hold 5 pounds of meat or more. In proportion to their size, that's like a 150-pound human consuming an entire 25-pound turkey for Thanksgiving. Though a canine's digestive system can handle a meal that size better than we could, I can't help but think that the post-meal nap these two coyotes did felt really good.
Thanks, Sarah, so much for that awesome interp. Up next, we have a short little moose video featuring one of our most prominent moose in Grand Teton National Park. I'm really excited to show you guys this moose. It's the first time I think he's been featured on this broadcast, but we see him all the time and he's a really cool individual. And so here you go.
This is Shoshone, the largest moose in the Tetons. He can be identified currently because his right ear slouches down. You can see that here in this video. Shoshone is one of the most sought after individual moose for photographers in the Tetons. And it's pretty cool because we are able to follow this individual in the summer, but also the winter after he drops his antlers, and we can still identify him by that droopy ear. Winter is one of the hardest times for moose in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. They are very dependent on browse. You can see Shoshone here feeding on willows. And when snow conditions get deep, it can limit how much food they have access to during the winter months. We recently just got a really big snowstorm. This video was taken before that. And so it's likely that Shoshone and other moose have had to move out of these areas where there was lower snow and head into neighborhoods or even south of town in order to find enough nutrition to survive the winter. And the reason we care about that is because when moose leave the national park, they do come into a lot of conflict with road crossings. And so this is our friendly reminder to drive safely when you come and visit Jackson Hole. And if you live in Jackson, to be aware of wildlife crossings in the middle of the night. That way we can continue to have incredible sightings like these videos shot by guides up in Grand Teton of our most famous moose, Shoshone in the Tetons.
Pretty awesome to see Shoshone out there surviving the winter in Grand Teton National Park. We're not too sure where he is now. He probably migrated elsewhere to go and find some food, but pretty awesome that we got to see him one more time before the spring. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to everyone who's being so supportive in the comments. Kelsey is currently running our comment section, and she just said, "You rock, Tyler." And so I wanted to give her a shout out and say hi to Kelsey, and I hope you're doing well. Up next, we have my favorite section of Wildlife Wednesday, and that is our trivia or our question and answer segment. But before we get to that is my second favorite segment, which is trivia. And so how this works is we're going to show you guys kind of a featured web store item. And if you answer the trivia question correctly, you get to choose an item from our web store, which is pretty exciting. And so we're going to show you guys last month's trivia question, and then we're going to go with this month's trivia question. And so to start out, our featured item for this month are these coffee mugs, which are made by a local artist, which are pretty great. You know, it's been a cold winter, and so especially if you get up early, you need to have a warm mug full of coffee on your drive in to work every single day. And so you can find this item along with a bunch of others on our web store. The really cool thing about our web store is that all of the proceeds actually go back to the guides. EcoTour Adventures provides guides with a whole bunch of benefits when they work for us. And so we're committed to continuing to provide that. And the money that goes into the web store actually goes towards guides benefits, which is pretty awesome. So up next, we have last month's trivia question, which I know a lot of people answered correctly. I monitored the comments and saw some great answers coming in, which was pretty sweet. Here's the question from last month. What is the most common food for coyotes on the National Elk Refuge during winter? And for those of you who chose C, voles and other rodents, you are correct. That is the right answer. And of course, we have that video of that coyote chewing on what I think is a hip bone, just to throw you off a little bit. But congratulations on everyone who got that question correct. This month we have another question. Instead of with a mammal, we went with a bird this time. The question for this month is, what is the largest species of owl in Grand Teton? A, great gray owl for length, B, great horned owl for weight, C, barred owl for length, or D, A and B. And so feel free to comment below this video your answers. And if you're viewing this video from somewhere else, like if we've shared this video to a page or someone else has shared it to a page, you have to go to the original video at our Facebook page, Jackson Hole EcoTour Adventures on Facebook, to answer under our comment section. Otherwise, we won't see your answer. And that way you can be entered for that drawing to win a prize from our web store, which is pretty exciting. Woohoo. All right, well, that wraps up trivia for this month. On to my next, or my favorite segment of Wildlife Wednesday, which is the question and answer. And, you know, I'm sitting here with an iPad, and this is kind of how I'm able to see everyone's comments. And so I've been seeing some great questions come in so far. Let's see here. And so how it works is I'm going to be looking at the questions that came in first and then scrolling downwards and answering them as we go. And we had one that was really good. Let's see here. Oh yeah, here it is. So Mark asked, I read a recent story on an anonymous $40 million gift to Yellowstone National Park to help housing. And he was also asking about Pierce Brosnan, who is, if you don't know who Pierce Brosnan is, he played like James Bond. He was like the original James Bond. Recently, he was caught wandering into a thermal area, and he was wondering if I could expand on these two issues. This is great. Yeah, so today, I believe, Yellowstone got a $40 million donation for employee housing, which is pretty incredible that someone would be that generous to donate that money. If you live on a border town to a national park, whether that's Rocky Mountain National Park, Grand Teton, Yellowstone, odds are housing is going to be limited. And the reasons for that is everyone really wants to live close to national park. And so if you are coming from somewhere else to work for a national park, housing can be incredibly limited. Oftentimes border towns are incredibly small communities and they just don't have infrastructure to support a lot of seasonal workers. And so Yellowstone employs over 3,000 workers every single summer. So it's a lot of people and they don't have housing to support all of those workers. Some people are able to find housing in Gardner or West Yellowstone, but it's incredibly limited. And a lot of employees actually live in Yellowstone National Park at Mammoth, which is a town in Yellowstone National Park that has some employee housing, but it's pretty limited. And so obviously the national parks have a budget that they have to follow every single year, and they don't often have resources that they can allocate to a project like that. And Yellowstone was just hit with a major flood, which destroyed a lot of infrastructure that they've had to rebuild. And so they're even tighter budget-wise when it comes to building new things like new roads or new housing for employees. And so this donation, in my opinion, could not come at a better time because Yellowstone needs employee housing, but they probably don't have the funds for it right now since they're doing so much construction and rebuilding. And so great question. Here in Jackson, a lot of people who work for Grand Teton National Park also live in employee housing, but also in the national park. And some of that employee housing has also been donated. My second summer out here, we had actually a private landowner donate some of their property to Grand Teton National Park. A little more complicated than that. They donated it to a nonprofit, and then the nonprofit donated it to Grand Teton. And they did that specifically to increase employee housing within the national park, which is pretty awesome. As far as the second part of that question, we're asking about Pierce Brosnan, who went into a thermal feature. I believe that happened this fall. And he was caught and received a citation for that. For anyone who goes to Yellowstone National Park and intrudes upon thermal features, they can receive a ticket. It's an issue for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, personal safety. A lot of those hot springs are over 200 degrees, and so you wouldn't survive if you fell into them. And then another reason is resource protection. Yellowstone National Park, they have a responsibility to protect thermal features so that people for years, hundreds of years, hopefully, will be able to come and view the geothermal features of Yellowstone National Park. And so they're pretty dedicated to keeping people out of it. The problem is we do get millions of people visiting Yellowstone every single year. And so even if just 0.1% of those people break the rules and walk into thermal features, that's going to have a huge impact on the geology and on the natural resources. In Grand Teton, we don't have as many thermal features, but we do have winter wildlife closures, and they're very similar to geothermal features in that you're not allowed to go into them. They are closed, and that's for what the park calls resource protection, but it's to protect the winter wildlife. And so whenever you visit a national park, if you plan to go hiking or maybe exploring off trail, read the rules and regulations. Most national parks have maps online that outline closures. So either wildlife closures or places where they just don't want you to go. And if you end up going to those national parks, just make sure that you're educating yourself on those closures and then also the rules and regulations. I mean, I feel like if you go to Yellowstone, you can't necessarily miss the signs that you're going to, that's not allowed to walk, that you're not allowed to walk off the boardwalks, but still, it's your responsibility. The park has put up a lot of signage to prevent that. And so as far as I know, he is going to be charged. I think the national park is pursuing some charges against him. Whether or not he'll just have to pay a fine or actually serve jail time is yet to be seen, but it'll be interesting. And I don't know, I kind of feel like he is a high profile case, and so they're using him a little bit as an example to really enforce the rules and to try and create a culture around protecting resources in Yellowstone National Park. It's going to be an interesting story to follow, and it'll be cool to see what happens. Don't trespass on thermal features in Yellowstone. You can get arrested for that. All right. This is from Kelsey. We did get hammered with snow. It snowed a ton in the past couple of days, like 2 or 3 feet. It's crazy. Like a month ago, we were at 75% of our snowpack, and this last storm brought us right up to 100%, which we're super excited because we are really concerned about water here in Wyoming. In a lot of East Coast states where it's wetter, that's not as much of an issue, but we are really a high mountain desert. And so the more snow we get in the winter, typically the better off we are in the summer when it comes to agriculture and preventing wildfires. And I'm also supporting wildlife that depends on green vegetation during the summer. Ooh. So Libby asked, any news on the Kelly parcel? So I think we talked about this last month, and I gave everyone a pretty good rundown about what is going on. If you're new here and you don't know what's happening, what is going on is there is about a square mile piece of state land, which is adjacent to Grand Teton National Park, that the state is going to be putting up for auction. They thought they were going to put it up for auction this year, but when they released it to public comment, there was such public outcry by the locals that they delayed it for a year. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. I haven't heard of any recent news. As far as I know, that auction is delayed for a year. The good news is that time could give Grand Teton enough time to allocate money to purchase that property. I could see it going one of both ways. Grand Teton could purchase that, and it could be, incorporated into Grand Teton National Park, which would be really exciting for us here. Obviously, we don't want housing developments built right next to the national park. That area in particular is really important for pronghorn and elk migration. We see a lot of wolves in that area. And so from a business standpoint, it's important for us to protect that piece of land because we get a lot of our wildlife sightings there. Another way that could happen is a private landowner could buy it, which would be unfortunate, and it could be developed. We're hoping that Grand Teton National Park will be able to find the resources and the money to actually purchase that. But next year we're just going to have to find out and see what happens with the Kelly parcel. I have hopes that it'll be incorporated into Grand Teton, but we will just have to see next year when that auction happens. As I hear things, feel free to ask again in future broadcasts, and I'll give you guys updates as best as I can. But that's kind of where we're at right now. We're going to wait a year and see what happens. All right. Oh, hi, Dawn. Dawn always asks the best questions. If you guys are new here, you don't know who Dawn is one of our people who always watches us, one of our most loyal subscribers, if you will. And so Dawn always asks really interesting questions about the wildlife out here. And so this month, Dawn is asking, on average, how many young do wolverines have every year? And what size are the newborns? Well, this is an interesting question, especially because wolverines have been on the news recently. Colorado is thinking about reintroducing wolverines, which is really exciting. My home state's Colorado. There's wolves down there now. They just reintroduced wolves, and kind of the next predator they're thinking about bringing back is the wolverine. And of course, there's been a whole bunch of hype about that. One of the reasons that can be controversial has to do with the way that wolverines reproduce. So wolverines, they are very dependent on heavy snowfall and heavy snowpack, especially later into the spring, to successfully reproduce. What they do is they burrow into the snow and they give birth in there, and the snow kind of protects and insulates those young wolverines when they're first born. As far as litter size goes, I've heard of wolverines having only one. I've heard of wolverines having up to 6 in a litter. And so I think it does depend. I would say the average is around 3. I've seen in a lot of documentaries wolverines raising pairs of offspring. And so I would say the range is between 1 and 6 kits, I believe is what they're called, within a litter. And but by no means do they always successfully raise all of them. If they give birth to 4, I would say they'd be great to raise 2 of them successfully. And especially with, changing climate, snowpacks are decreasing, reproduction for wolverines is becoming a lot more difficult. Another reason why we're worried about the Colorado reintroduction is because it is further south than Wyoming. Wyoming already has a pretty low wolverine population. It's believed that there's between 10 to 15 in the entire state, which is pretty low. And because they're being impacted by warmer springs, Colorado's further south, it's going to be warmer there. They might be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And so if Colorado reintroduces wolverines, they have to really take those factors into consideration. Is it worth spending a ton of money bringing wolverines to Colorado if they're not going to survive, is kind of the question that people are asking right now. Why would we spend a ton of money bringing wolverines if the population can't sustain itself and successfully reproduce in the wild? We know that historically wolverines did live in Colorado, and that wolverines recently have visited Colorado, but they haven't been able to establish a successful breeding population since they were extirpated by fur trappers. And so I'm really curious to see how this goes. For the second part of that question, Don was asking, how much does a newborn wolverine weigh? And they're pretty small. They're about 1/40th the size of their mother when they're born. And so that would be about 1 pound when they're born, which is crazy. And so wolverines are a member of the carnivore family, which includes bears and wolves and foxes. And one common theme with the carnivore family is that their offspring are often very small and relatively undeveloped. They're often born with very little fur. Their eyes are closed. They can't see yet. Their ears are closed. And they're guided primarily when they're born by their sense of smell, which is really interesting. When bears are born, they're about the size of a soda can, which is pretty insane. And so that's a common theme generally across the carnivore family, is they have really small, underdeveloped young. And then they have to grow those young very quickly to get them to survive. And so by the time young grizzlies are coming out of hibernation, they are already the size of like a Pomeranian. By 3 months old, wolves are already weighing like 30, 40 pounds, about the size of a coyote, which is pretty awesome. For wolverines, they grow very quickly and they can be independent only 1 year after being born, which is pretty insane. And so, yeah, from really small, humble beginnings, you can get a big grizzly bear, you can get a wolf, you can get a wolverine, which is pretty crazy. Thanks, Don, so much for that awesome question about wolverines. Wolverines have been on my mind a lot recently, just with the reintroduction to Colorado and everything. And I've seen almost all the carnivores now in Wyoming, except for 2, and that's the lynx and the wolverine. And so both of those animals are on my radar for tours. Maybe in the coming weeks, I'll be able to find one, or in the coming years. Oh, we actually have a question from Tenley. This is awesome. So everyone say hi to Tenley. Tenley used to do the broadcast with me couple months back, and so good to see her comments or down below in the comment section. She's asking me what my favorite wildlife sighting was this winter. I will say it's the pygmy owl. So in the broadcast, we featured pygmy owls. The pygmy owl that was sitting on the top of a dead tree hooting is a owl that I found, and I worked really, really hard to find that owl. I went out into the park, kind of, on my own on my day off, and was driving around. I was really looking for wolves. I was looking for large carnivores, and I stopped to scan this area, and I heard this pygmy owl really faintly in the distance hooting, and it seemed like it was on the top of this ridge. And so what I did is I threw on my cross-country skis, and I skied as close as I could to it. But eventually what happened was the snow got so deep and the hill got so steep that my skis weren't able to go uphill anymore. I wasn't using backcountry skis, I was using cross-country skis, which you can go uphill in, but only to a certain extent. And so I was very determined to find this pygmy owl. And so what I did is I took my skis off and put them at the base of a tree, and I post-holed. And post-holing is where you're just basically swimming through the snow. You're hip deep, you're using all your muscles and strength as you can to actually walk through hip deep snow that is often like super wet and icy. And so I climbed all the way to the top of this hill post-holing. And the owl called the entire time, which was incredible to me. It called for probably 5 hours. It took me 5 hours to find it. And so that entire time I was hiking and very exhausted. When I actually got to the tree where the owl was sitting, I was drenched in sweat. And the crazy part was I ended up under the tree where the owl was singing without even realizing it. I stopped to listen for the owl, and when owls call, they'll often sit in a tree and then rotate their head as they call. And so it sounded like the calls were coming from different directions. And so I had to sit there for a minute and try and pinpoint the sound, and I eventually realized it was in the tree above me. And so got my pygmy owl for the year, got to hear it hooting and get to share that with you guys. I think that's probably my favorite wildlife sighting of this year. I think partially because of the adventure in finding the owl. It was definitely a blast. And I was very tired afterwards and sore the next day. And so we don't always see animals right next to the road. We often, see them while we're hiking as well. All right, let's see what happened or what questions we have next. Libby's asking, how much snow do you guys get? We got a lot of snow recently. I don't know exact numbers, but down in the valley, I would guess 2 feet to maybe 2.5 feet. Up on the mountain, it's been insane. We were getting so much snow, they actually had to close both Snow King and Jackson Hole Mountain resorts because they were worried about avalanche danger. And on one day during this recent snow blizzard, they closed the lifts until 11, which was super late. Typically, lifts, I believe, are opening at like 9 right now. And so to have that 2-hour delay was definitely a big deal, especially for people visiting. Another thing that we've had to consider with this weather is whether or not it's safe to tour. And so when we're out, in a blizzard, we will obviously try to tour, but sometimes those conditions can be crazy when it's a blizzard. And so, it's been wild. We went from, I think I said earlier, 75% snowpack to 100% snowpack in one storm. And so when it snows here in Jackson, it can be heavy. It can go for a while, and it can snow a lot. And so, we're happy to have the water, but for a couple days there, I was like, am I going to be able to drive to the grocery store? Yeah, it's been crazy. And they're still clearing the snow right now. I'm right next to a really busy road, and it is super slushy out there, and they haven't cleared it yet. And so driving is really interesting right now. On the way to the broadcast, I actually saw a bus stuck, which was crazy. And so hopefully they got unstuck. It's, it can be crazy conditions here in Jackson. Oh, everyone's saying hi to Tenley. Ooh. Here's a question from Bo. And so Bo is wasn't able to make it for the broadcast today, but he is watching with us. And so he asked a question. Tyler, tell me more about black wolf genetics. Can 2 gray wolves make a black wolf? And so the answer for that is no. 2 gray wolves, well, excuse me, actually it's yes, sorry, let me get my genetics mind in order. Yes, 2 gray wolves can have black pups. And so the reason for that, hold on, I'm getting it confused. If you guys remember way back in school, Mendelian genetics, when they made you do the like little grid with the 4 chart, that's literally what I'm imagining in my head right now. And so the black gene in wolves is dominant and the gray gene is recessive. And so what that means is that 2 gray wolves cannot have black pups. And that's because if 2 black wolves can have gray pups, but 2 gray wolves cannot. And the reason for that is because gray wolves have to have 2 gray genes in order to express the gray coat color. Took me a minute to get there. And so black wolves can have either 2 black genes, or they could have 1 black gene and 1 gray gene. And so how this works is if 2 black wolves that both have, let's say 1 black gene, 1 gray gene, end up mating, they can produce both gray and black offspring. If 2 gray wolves, which both express gray genes, breed, they can only produce gray offspring. And so, sorry about that confusion. And this plays a factor when we're looking at wolf packs. And so a really great example is the Lower Gros Ventre wolf pack, which is the wolf pack that we featured in this broadcast. They are made up of entirely gray wolves. 1 white wolf, but a white wolf is just a gray wolf that has turned white with age. And so they are all expressing those recessive genes, 2 grays or 2 gray genes per wolf. And so that means that the alpha pair are both gray. But what's interesting is there is a pack in Yellowstone National Park called the 8 Mile Pack, and they were all gray this past winter. Both of the alpha pair were gray, and so what we were expecting this spring is that all the pups would come out gray. What happened is 3 pups were actually born black, and so we suspect that one of the females, or maybe even the alpha female, snuck away from the pack and ended up mating with a black wolf in secrecy, and then came back to the pack and gave birth. And so when we're thinking about these genetics and the color coat makeup of a pack, there's a couple of things to consider. Wolves can go off and mate with other members from different packs, and then we have to consider those genetics too. And so thanks for the question, Bo. Got a little turned around there with the genetics. Had to go back to, imagining that grid from 8th grade science. Great question, yeah. And so when you're out on tour, you can actually understand the coat color genetics of wolves. But coat color varies a lot between different mammal species. So like a good example are black bears, foxes, and marmots. They all can appear in different colors here in Grand Teton National Park, but those genetics are more complex than the Mendelian genetics that I just described with the black and gray wolves. And so if you see like a black fox or maybe a brown colored black bear, that's a confusing sentence. Our black bears do turn brown occasionally. That is going to be more complex than a black versus a gray colored wolf. Yeah, great question, Bo. Ooh, sweet. I'm seeing lots of answers. Looks pretty good. Let's see if we have any other questions. Hi, Betsy from Atlanta. I'm always curious to see where our viewers are from. I think last month we had someone from Puerto Rico, which is pretty exciting. But we've also had people from like France, and I think we had someone from South Africa at one point. And so it's really amazing to see how far spread our viewers can be. And so if you guys are in the comment section, feel free to tell me where you're from. It'd be cool to see where everyone is viewing from. Hi from Wyoming. Awesome. Well, it looks like we covered all the questions for today's broadcast. And so thank you all so much for tuning in. And once again, my name is Tyler Greenlee, and I hope you guys have an incredible week and an incredible month. And we'll see you all in April. And stay warm out there. I'm excited for spring. We'll see you next month. Bye.